Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is George here from Lucia. And on today's episode, we have Dr. Boyer. She's the professor of marketing and sales at Bryant University. She's also heading up the Northeast Collegiate Sales competition and a co-founder of Rainmakers. And Rainmakers is an AI content and machine learning platform built to help with learning and development for the future sales talent that we have coming out of college. So everybody, please welcome Dr. Boyer here. And Dr. Boyer, thanks for joining here. How's it going?
Oh, thanks so much, George. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for including me.
Appreciate it. And I thought, it'd be a great conversation to have. I think we've always been talking to sales leaders, talking to marketing leaders, people in revenue generation, rev ops, but I thought we can get a lot of positives and benefits from getting our listeners to listen to a professor here that's working on training and breeding the best sales talent that's going to be coming into the workforce. So I'm happy we're having this conversation here today. So I think
Me
to start it off,
Yeah,
let's talk about you. I'd love to our listeners to hear about your background and how you got to where you are today. I know you started, interestingly enough, in a firefighting and U.S. Customs, kind of the crime and justice industry, as well as like civil service, and now you're leading sales and marketing organizations. Would love to hear more about that.
sure. The path to sales is twisting and winding, and how many people really graduate from high school and they say, I want to go and study sales and be a salesperson. I mean, how many people graduate from high school and really even know what they're going to do? You probably shift that so many different times. But you're right. I was a firefighter. Exciting times. I loved the opportunity to always know what was happening. If someone called 911, I didn't have to just stare as I was passing the scene. I knew exactly what was going on, and I got to be a part of helping to fix whatever the problem is. Usually people don't call 911 when everything is great.
Right.
so, so yeah, I tried that, and I realized that that was really emotionally very difficult to see so much heartache and loss. I studied criminology, like you said, and psychology, and I worked at US Customs. And again, really thrilling, exciting opportunity. But again, just scary because you think, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to me if I'm walking down a stairwell at 3 o'clock in the morning because you don't work on the good guys schedule. So it was just, it felt like, this really isn't the life for a family, to be able to just, have a good relationship. So I started to explore some other areas, and, I found marketing and I found sales through that, and I got my PhD. So I was studying sales training because I had sold financial services. I even got to sell the Cutco knives when I was in college. And I always noticed, sometimes I did really well. And then sometimes it was awful. And it's so defeating and deflating when you go into a sales call and you have so much hope and then you leave in despair. So I really wanted to study and understand how can we help people who are in sales learn more effectively. Is there a strategy? Is there a process that would mean that you're more successful than others? And so I did my dissertation on self-directed learning, and just, how do we learn more effectively? How do we learn so that we perform better? And just kind of translated that into teaching, and then developing an app that we're using that is helping thousands of students to train and learn how to sell.
That's awesome. And that's what Rainmakers is doing. I think, it's definitely a good move because it's opening up a lot of segues for students to really find out what they're good at before they're even working at a company and test out, doing a discovery, trying to close, negotiate. And then it also gives them the opportunity to get, recruited by some of the best companies out there that are hiring. So that's great. You mentioned something about, you leaving some meetings and feeling a little bit of despair. How do those happen? Like, is that more on the self? Is it more on a type of meeting, the clients that you're meeting? Like, what did you kind of like figure out of that?
Well, I think a lot of us go into meetings and we forget to take 30 seconds, 2 minutes before we go into the meeting to think about, what do you want to get out of the meeting? What is the next best step that's appropriate for you and the next best step for the client? And I think sometimes we have a tendency to overestimate how far along we are. If we get a lot of positive signals, we're like, yes, I'm closing the sale today. And really, there's so many more steps. So a lot of it is just really setting yourself up strategically, doing the research, but then making sure that you're asking the right questions, asking the questions that are going to really make an impact to get the client to think about their problem differently, right? So it's less about trying to push your product and more about trying to find out and discover what's happening with your customer and how can you help them, right? And so I think if we kind of switch that mindset, sometimes we get so pushed by our managers of like, you have to hit this quota, you have to make the sale. Then you start to get desperate and you forget about the process. And so at the end of the day, you've got to follow the process.
I definitely agree with you. I think you're talking about happy years right there, is what we call it. And it can be your best enemy if you know how to take everything you have and find out more about it, or you can get sucked into happy years and not ask a single more question. You can assume that, hey, this is ready to go, sending out the contract. And next thing you know, you're asking, hey, is this still something of interest? Or you're sending out an email to follow up on a DocuSign that's not signed and figured out yet. Now, it also like ties back to something you said earlier about, learning more effectively and like, how do we learn, right? And I feel like with, your background, with psychology, marketing, selling, maybe a little bit of criminology as well. I mean, what do you feel like are the most impactful ways of teaching or learning effectively?
No, that's
Is
a,
it
that's a great question. So in my dissertation, I looked at adult learning theory. So basically, anyone that's an adult, how do you learn most effectively? What's working, what doesn't work? So what we do know is that there's a lot of training out there that's standardized, right? So everybody comes in, maybe you go into a classroom setting, right, where everyone's coming in for a meeting and there might be somebody that's speaking and training. They're probably using some kind of like PowerPoint deck, right? And so what happened with that learning? First of all, the manager or somebody above, somebody that's not a salesperson, probably figured out what needed to be learned. They decided when it was going to be learned, how it was going to be learned. So everything is standardized. So you come in and no matter what your skill set is, you have to be on this learning track that everybody else is in. And what we know about salespeople is that when you go into a training and you feel like you already know this, then it's an attack on your competence. And you just withdraw, you don't want to hear it, and you start to get cynical. You start to have thoughts like, I don't know why I'm here. This is a waste of time. I've got clients. I need FaceTime with them. This isn't, right? And so you start to think about that instead of actually listening to hear if there's something that's new or something that's useful or related to you. So the more that we can actually empower people that are learning and help them learn exactly what they need when they need it, that is really the key. So when learners feel like the training is relevant to the real world, it's going to help them to make more money. It's something that they really need, then their motivation spikes up. So you might say, well, how do you even get them to do that? Well, you have to include them in the process. So you have to individualize the training and learning. And you might say, oh, that sounds really expensive. There's actually ways that you can do it that are not so expensive to help every single person to have their own learning plan. And you give them some more autonomy. So you have them step in and help in the process of like, what do I learn? When do I learn it? How do I learn it? What resources do I need? How do I prove to you that I've learned this thing? Right. So if you're taking a class on, I don't know, a new database that you have to use, or maybe like a CRM system that you
right?
have to use. Having a project in place and being accountable to that. But first is having the person recognize that in order to be more successful, they really need to learn those specific skills. So when they're involved and they buy into it, then the performance is higher, the learning is better. It all works out. So I'll do in my undergraduate and in my MBA classes, self-directed learning projects. And just in those projects, the students are involved. A lot of them have gotten promotions at their jobs because they were working on something that they knew that was going to help advance them and move forward. So, taking taking some of that control and giving it back to your team is huge. Like, what business does an HR person have in deciding what a salesperson needs to learn? They're not out there in the field. They don't know what is currently happening. So we need to move away from that model.
Definitely. I feel like in that model could be like negatively impacting the business, especially if you're hiring a lot of like tenured reps coming from different companies that could have been, the highest and best contributors somewhere else, but all of a sudden they're coming here and they feel like they're having to relearn something from scratch. So
Hmm.
no, I do agree with you, like how you said you could get a little bit defensive about relearning because I've definitely felt like that before too. And I have a long way to go. I don't think I'm there yet. Um, but in terms of like, how do you get there? Like, how do you inspire that sales motivation for the people that actually need to do a little bit of self-reflection, understand where those gaps are from within their like
Sure.
processes are and better those? Is
Yeah,
that more like the leader or the actual individual contributor themselves?
whenever I go and do training, I do quite a bit of training for people that are, they just got into sales or they've been selling for more than 25 years. Sometimes all the people are in the same room, and so it can be really challenging. But usually I have some kind of an exercise where I have them, do an activity, maybe a little mini role play. And I see where the gaps are because people who've been selling for many, many years, multiple decades, often they forget some of the steps, and if you don't take the steps when you go out for new business, you're gonna have some problems. It's not gonna work out. So I have them self-diagnose what they did right and what they need to work on. But I also use a lot of adaptability training and improv as well. And with that, most people haven't done it. They're games, they're fun activities, and people are smiling and having a good time. And so then their defense mechanisms, they kind of start to decrease, and then they're completely open to learning. But you're absolutely right. Anyone that's been selling for 10 plus years, 20 plus years, you have a little bit of a chip on your shoulder because you're like, I've been doing this. What are you going to tell me that I don't know already? So for the learner, being open, so important. Being open and knowing that you can always learn something new, especially since things are changing all the time. But for the trainer also to bring something innovative and new and fresh into the training and helping the learners to assess where they are before they even get started.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with you there. And I personally, me, like I'm doing it today, but I think we need to do a little bit more where I myself need to do a little bit more self-reflection. My team has to do it a little bit more, just so they know exactly where these areas of improvement need to be, and we can work together on building a gap to cover those. Because I feel like as our team grows, right? Like, and this is probably a similar scenario for many growing companies. You have 5 people today looking to get to 10 by end of the year. Everyone's going to have a different learning curve. Some people have already learned the basics and the foundation 3 months ago, whereas the new people coming in will need to learn that as well, and they won't be on par with everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
So that's super helpful right there. Thanks for sharing that with us.
That's
Um,
exactly right. And another thing that you can do is you can just have them, they might have a resume that they're using, or their LinkedIn profile, and you can have them just take a look at that and then look at, what's the next promotion that they want, and find some people online and see, what's the difference between where they are, the experiences, knowledge, abilities that they have, and that next step, or the step in 5 years,
right.
whatever that is, to identify what the gap is, so then they can start to realize where the deficiency is and start to work toward that. And you never know, a lot of your sales teams they're filled with brilliant people that might have some ideas that a manager would never have thought of for training. I know for one of the self-directed learning projects, one of my students several years ago, he wanted to work on resilience. So he felt like, oh, gosh, like I need to get really good at handling rejection. And I never would have assigned him this assignment, but his thing was he wanted to get rejected as much as he could. So he had a plan, and I let him run with the plan. He would go out to bars and he would go hit on, well, not hit on, but, talk to the
Right.
most beautiful women in there, and not just, strike up a conversation, but he would say, rate my looks, right? And like
Oh,
totally putting
okay.
himself out there. And I mean, he's taking personal rejection here, possibly, right? And
Okay.
so then it's like, okay, well, if I'm selling a product, it's not quite so personal. If I can handle this, then I can handle so much more. What's scarier than doing something like that? And he had a ton of different exercises that he was doing. But I mean, could I have ever told him to do that? No way. Not if I wanted to keep my job. But he really wanted it, and he still talks about it to this day. And it's just he had that idea, not me.
How did it work for him? I'm curious to hear
It
about that.
worked.
It
Oh my
worked?
gosh, it totally worked. He's
Wow.
doing very well now. He's doing very well, and he has no problem. He understands maybe just not a good fit, maybe not the right person, right? You got to go where you're appreciated, and yeah, he's doing wonderful.
That's great to hear. Well, it kind of like ties into like the question I wanted to ask you next because, talent is definitely a big deal. Like, recruiting talent and finding talent. You have folks that are just getting out of college now, which are going to be your entry level folks. But at the same time, I feel like companies need to hire senior level talent, people that have done this in the past, a little bit more experience into it. From your perspective, I mean, how do you find the right talent? Where do we look for? Like, what do you look for in particular? Is there some characteristics? Are there some questions that you can ask in an interview process?
No,
Um,
that's a really good question. What I do hear from companies, because I'm obviously training university talent at a sales program, and what I'll hear is that some of my organizations will say your interns are running circles around some of the people that have been here selling for a while, because the students in a sales program are doing hundreds of role plays. They're not afraid to have the meeting, and they've been coached by so many people. All the sponsors that come in and participate, they're there giving the students feedback. A lot of the students do have internships, and so they understand what it's like to go into a sales role. So I would say, first, don't overlook a really strong sales program student just because it's their first, job after college, because they can perform really well. And I would look at some of the data. I would look at, first of all, how coachable somebody is. We've all been in a situation where we've hired someone that was just really, really good, but then they damaged the morale of the team because of that lone wolf syndrome, and like they don't really get along with everybody. They're not a team player. That can be damaging. I guess it depends on your culture as well. And then just look at how their performance has improved over time. There's so much data now that you can use. I know if you look at Rainmakers, you could see how often did somebody train, how many times do they train, like frequency. You could look at volume. You could look at how fast their performance improves over time. You can look at an assessment to see, look at their psychological capital. How optimistic are they? How resilient are they? How do they show empathy to the clients? All right. So thinking about some of those traits that they have that can fit into your team as well. And then, looking at the role. The Chally group has a really a good assessment that helps you understand, if you take it or if you're hiring, of the person that's taken it, of what will they succeed in, what kind of a role. Are they more of a hunter, are they a farmer, they have like 16 different categories to fit into the different roles. But at the end of the day, what I see from the employers who are using Rainmakers is that they're looking for the students that have done a lot of role plays. One of my students did 350 role plays last semester with the bot, and everybody wants to hire him because they're like, he cares a lot, he works hard, he's going to solve a problem. Whatever that problem is that arises, he's not going to let it go. He's going to make sure that he's thorough.
yeah,
So
and I think
looking at
we've tried to
those.
hire him too. I think we said something about it too to him as well, because he's Yeah, the role play is definitely remarkable, and I love how you can listen to them. Typically you're not listening to people's role plays until you hire that person and you've made that investment to have them here. So in this case, getting an idea of how these students communicate, how their discovery process looks like before you even talk to them about it, negotiations and things like that is it's super helpful. Um,
Sure.
and I think to maybe to cap off and end off our conversation here, I mean, I'd love to hear like what are some of your advice that you'd give to sellers out there? Maybe sellers that are just looking to get into sales, have already been doing sales for a while. What do you feel like there's some areas that resonate to you that would be impactful for these folks?
Definitely trusting the process. That there are processes out there that can help you. So if you trust the process, then you're going to have more success. When you're not doing as well as you want, don't withdraw. That's the time that you want to lean in and talk to your manager. And then when you're getting an objection or when you're getting pushback, the biggest problem people have is becoming defensive. Now, that's whether they're selling or just in a conversation with their spouse, right? Or their friends. So whenever you're getting pushback, just take a second and think about what the motivation is behind it. Ask a question about it, being open. Don't be defensive and think someone's attacking you. Just use it as an opportunity to get more information. And if you do that, your entire conversation could go in a different way than if you're defensive at first. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing. If you're getting into sales, you're going to get a lot of pushback. Use it to your advantage. It's a really positive thing. If people don't care, they're not going to give you pushback. They're going to just say, "Okay, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good." And they're never going to say yes. But if they give you pushback, it means that they're actually considering looking at your product or your service or you or your company, something, and they're interested. So
Yeah.
changing your mindset there will help you to be more successful.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with the pushback and getting any kind of feedback on something. The second you get defensive, I feel like just like with anything, if you get defensive about something, there's obviously something there that's not right or true or could be there, but it's just the way that people perceive it on the other side. They might see it as you're trying to protect something. So I do like objections because I feel like if there are no objections, it could be a red flag. Why isn't anyone asking too many questions? I want to answer these questions and I expect them to be asked. But it also does fall back on the process. Sometimes, we don't know what this process holds in general for us. It's good to follow it, step by step, and don't withdraw if you're having a tough time. And this job is all about, knowing how to handle these ups and downs. There's a lot more downs than ups in sales, so we just have to ride the wave and stay positive, and keep a positive mental attitude. I feel like, and
Well,
and be a sponge in general.
exactly. And I learned that process was really important when I was 18 and I was a firefighter. And I went into a building. My oxygen was running out. So I'm in a burning building. We're looking for a 6-month-old baby. It's a structure fire, it's a house fire. I'm going in and I'm lost for my team and I can't find my way out. My oxygen is beeping, which means I have so many minutes left. And I started to panic. And when you panic, you start breathing a lot faster. And I had to take a moment and realize the only person that was going to save me was me. And panicking was not going to help anybody. It was going to make the problem a lot worse. So I had to remember, okay, what's the process? What do I do? How do I get myself out of this? And when you're a firefighter, you go into a building, you're crawling and you have your right hand on the wall. And so you just keep going around with your right hand until you find your way to an exit. And so I was able to stop and take control of the situation. And I realized like that's the process. It works. I was stuck in a closet. Like nobody, when you go into a fire, nobody cleans up their house before you come there.
Right.
And think about like your dirtiest day of your house is probably cleaner than what you see a lot. But I learned that you have to follow a process and you can take yourself out. Don't panic. Same thing in sales. Don't panic when you get the objection or the pushback or something's not going the right way. Just think about what is my process? How can I stick with this and, make this a positive?
I agree with you. It's all about taking a step back, take a deep breath, figure out what you have to do. And sometimes it's better to like pause and not say something before you do. One of the best things I like about Zoom is that if I'm on a big call, I usually mute myself and I usually say something that's completely like, I could have said something better in that case, but I'm muted. So it gives me a second to like rethink and say, hey, maybe I should say it in this way. And it's worked out so far. So,
Oh, good.
it's been a pleasure talking about this with you in general. I'm really excited to get set up with Rainmakers here and start recruiting some, high level talent coming out of college. Dr. Boyer, thank you so much for your time today, and I'm looking forward to maybe doing this again with you in the future. And good
Oh,
luck with the school year. Hopefully, it goes out pretty smooth and no speed bumps in a way.
thanks so much. And we're definitely looking forward to getting you in there because you have such a great opportunity. There's so much growth. This is exactly what sales program students come into sales programs for. They can get excited about opportunities like this. So
Absolutely.
looking
No,
forward to
we're
it.
super excited. Thanks, Dr. Boyer.
Thank
Have a good
you.
rest of your day. Bye.